Hello, Barb. Welcome to the Mentally a Badass podcast. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thanks, Justine. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I'm so excited to talk about boundaries today because I feel like that's very, very important. And I've noticed that some people still struggle with that. I personally have. It took me a lot of work to actually get there because boundaries usually come from people who are like people pleasing or they don't want, conflict and such. So I'm excited to get into that with you. So in every Mentally About Us episode, we first like to get to know our guests. So let's first talk about like your upbringing and also explain like what intergenerational family dysfunction is for the people who
Yeah,
may not know.
right. Sure. So, I was in my 50s when I started building boundaries. So just so you know, you're good if you've already got a handle on that or getting a handle on it. So, I actually maybe I knew that my family was dysfunctional, but I really didn't know until I got into the 12-step recovery program, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, which I didn't know that I qualified for that. I didn't hear the and dysfunctional families part at first. But looking back and comparing what happens in healthy families and what happened in my family, it's pretty clear that there was a lot of stuff that happened. And it's not like my parents being bad people. It's my parents doing the best they could with the tools they had because of the way that they grew up. So that's what it means to have intergenerational dysfunction. We just pass on what we know how to do. And so some examples of things that were not particularly healthy in my family is like a really good way to illustrate this is my dad would say, "Do you want me to give you a reason to cry?" And when you're really little and you think very concretely, it's like it's so confusing to be I'm like, "Wait, I am crying and you're like an authority figure in my life and you're telling me I don't have a reason to cry." So I'm like really questioning like what is real here? Like what's
Like gaslighting in a way.
reality? Kind of
Yeah.
in a way. But then it's one thing to say something like that's confusing to an adult, but when you're saying it to a child who is still trying to understand how the world works, it's even worse and its impact. So that caused me to not rely internally on myself for judgment about what was going on around me. We did things in my family, like some big fight or argument would happen, and then we would act like nothing happened and never talk about it. But then we would talk ad nauseum about things like the weather or the garden. What I knew when I was around 10 is that my dad was cheating on my mom, and it was like, I'm 10 and I know it. My mom has to know. And it was just this background thing going on in my family. But of course, nobody ever talks about it. I found out around that same age that my mom had been secretly smoking cigarettes for years. So right around 10, 11, I basically, by learning those two things, I learned I can't trust my parents. And but this is all on reflection, like in the past few years and my recovery that I've kind of figured those things out. So we weren't really talking about things like feelings. We weren't really talking about important things like spirituality and goals in life. Like I knew you're going to college, going to college, going to college, but I didn't know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And I really I was told get good grades, but it's not like anybody told me how to study or anything. It was just figure it out. So I really got the message in my family that I was supposed to know stuff by just osmosis or something. Like nobody was teaching me things. And then there was a lot of sarcasm in my family, and it would be really painful when someone would say something. And then when you were ow, they're like, oh, it's just a joke. And it's it's really not. You're trying to indirectly communicate what's really going on. And lots of teasing from everybody in the family. My older brother is a year and a half older than me. And I just realized in the last few weeks that he bullied me. I never thought of what he did. Now, he was bullied in school so badly in fourth grade and in eighth grade that there was an intervention in the school with my parents. But he was kind of a small kid. He was really, really smart. He kind of had a smart mouth. And so he was bullied. And It's always been like anything about bullying in my family was about my brother, but it's just come to my consciousness that the things that he was doing to me were bullying. So those are some examples. Now, I don't mean to paint the picture that nothing good happened in my family. I lived in a house. We had a yard. We always had food. We had a car. My parents always had jobs. They never told me, you're a piece of crap and you're never going to amount to anything. No, just the opposite. My father would say, you have the potential to do whatever you put your mind to. And I internalized that as you have the potential, but you're not doing it. So you would think having someone say to you something like that would like kind of bolster you. But to me, the relationship I had with my father was such that I internalized that like you have the capacity to do whatever you put your mind to, but you're not. So basically you're a failure. So, I mean, I could go on, but I think that probably paints a pretty good picture.
Yeah, and I totally understand that when you were mentioning like the details of your family, there were some things that I experienced with my family personally as well. I would say the only thing I didn't really experience was my mom smoking, because thankfully she didn't do that, because her mother actually smoked cigarettes so much to the point where my mom's like, I'm never touching your cigarette.
That was my
Same
dad.
and same for me. Like when I would go with her to my grandmother's, it would just smell like smoke as a child. And like, that's like what I've learned. So, not learned, but like, I wanted to stay away from that. But besides that, I mean, also my dad didn't cheat on my mom, but besides those two things, like everything sounds like very similar to my childhood as well. And it just shows that everyone has experienced the same things. And we're all just like learning as like we're on the internet and we're
Right.
meeting people from like all over the world and actually talking about things, especially since post-pandemic, people are being a lot more open about their mental health and what went on in their childhood, and just having that confidence on going on podcasts. So, which is such a beautiful thing. So,
Yeah.
to help future generations, because it honestly like breaks my heart. Like I listen to a lot of stories of like what people go through as a child and not realizing it, because what you said, like as a child, we're making sense of the world, where literally our brain is a sponge. So anything that is happening in our life, especially at that age of like 10 and such, is like, we're thinking like, okay, this is how the world is, right? So for me, I grew up in like a small town, and everybody kind of acted like that, mental health wise. It was really hard to find people who didn't think in that way. So did you grow up in a small town by any chance?
It was kind of small. It was a suburban. I think, at the time when I was growing up, there was probably 8,000 people. So it was relatively small.
You did grow up. If it's 8,000 people, that's a
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
town.
That's a
Yeah,
pretty small
right.
town. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like 300, but it's not, no, you're definitely not a city
And
or anything like
yeah,
that.
in
So
this day and age, 8,000 people is like nothing.
yeah,
Honestly, maybe
right.
mine was
Yeah.
like
It's bigger.
12,000.
It's much bigger now, but I don't live there either. So
Yeah. Did you ever have like thoughts that you think, when you grow up in school and you're surrounded by these people, that everywhere is exactly the same, like everybody thinks the same?
at times, but then like I remember this one specific friend when I went over to her house, things were very different in her house. Like the kids were like super respectful of their parents. They took off their shoes when they came in the house. It was like everybody was like super well behaved. There was never be any talking back to the parents. The parents talked with authority, but very calmly to their children. And I remember being like, I think I thought they were like rich or something. And that was why or something. I don't know. And their house was much bigger than ours. I don't think they were necessarily rich, but I think like in my mind, it was like, not that I felt like we were poor, but it was like they were rich or something. Like, I don't know how else to explain that.
No, it makes sense. I totally
Yeah.
get where you're coming from. I thought that too. There was
Yeah.
some, like, an ex-boyfriend of mine, he grew up in a more of like a wealthy area,
Mhm.
and being in his household, everything was just like chill. I was like, oh, it's not chaotic here. This is how it was, like the first experience. But yeah, and then I moved from New Jersey to Florida, and that completely changed my mindset towards everything. Were you ever bullied like your brother?
No.
That's good.
Yes, definitely. Except for by him.
Yeah, yeah. I know how it feels to
Yeah.
be bullied by a sibling. I was too, except that I like knew very well that she was
Yeah.
bullying me because I assumed that her calling me stupid and ugly is not like a kind thing to say to somebody.
Yeah. 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 He didn't come right out and, well, no, he would, and now that you say that, he would say, could I swear on your show? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
So he would say, how do you not know that? What are you, fucking stupid?
Yeah,
So
same.
it's like, he didn't say you're stupid, but he made a very strong like statement of like, you're stupid, you know?
Or like it felt like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. A lot of like hostile moments. So now that we talked about your childhood and where like, it originated, when was like the turning point when you're thinking to yourself, okay, I need to work on self-help? I like to hear that transition.
Yeah. Usually I start in 2015 when I was 52, but because you said personal development, I started therapy at 15. I got introduced to the whole self-help genre when I was like 22 or 23, and I have read and continue to read voraciously. I've done workshops, workbooks, retreats, seminars, physical fitness, like all the things, like for all the years, just tons and tons and tons and tons of work. And then in 2015, when I was 52, I hit a codependent bottom, which I will define in case people don't. So codependency is essentially someone who's codependent is really focused on that which is outside themselves. So they're worried about like, what is he doing? What is she doing? Or maybe what they're not doing. Or what does he need? What does she need? What does this situation need? What does the organization need? What does the cause need? And they're not focused at all internally. Classic codependent is someone who's in a relationship of some kind with an addict or an alcoholic. So they could be married to that person. They could be the parent of an adult alcoholic or addict, could be a sibling or just a really good friend or something like that. And they bend over backwards to try to get that person to not drink or not use and to like cover for them and like kind of buffer them from the negative consequences of their behavior. So what happened for me was I had started volunteering for a project to serve homeless people at my church. And right around that time, this homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner, and we became really good friends. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a sign from God, like to introduce me to a homeless person so that when I'm serving homeless people, they're like people, not just like the homeless. And it was actually really helpful to get his perspective. And so maybe 3 months into our friendship, we had a really big snowstorm where I live in New Haven, Connecticut. And I invited him to stay in my home rather than the homeless shelter, which I now know that's not normal. And he did. And then another time and within a few weeks, he was practically living with me. And I soon felt trapped in my own home. And this guy messed with me in a way that had never happened. Like he caused me to think like, that I was crazy, that I was a problem, that I was a bad person. And he was an addict and an alcoholic. And when I look back, I think, he might have also had some kind of personality disorder. And so I got into Codependence Anonymous and very quickly felt a sense of relief. And I very soon said to somebody, I think I need to be reparented. But I didn't know that reparenting was a thing that people do. I think I thought I made that up, Justine. And about 6 weeks into going to CODA, I went to go visit a friend in the next state over, and she had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 10 years and just raved about how utterly transformed her life was. And I was like, you're going to love it. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous. And she said, oh, let's see if we can find one of those meetings while you're here and we'll go together. And she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which is I knew of as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I can remember hearing that as long as I could remember, but it never occurred to me, like, why do they need a program and all that stuff? And I hadn't heard the and dysfunctional families part of it. So when she suggested it, I was like, I don't qualify for that, but I'll go for you because her dad's an alcoholic. And I walk in, and in one of the opening readings, they say, we reparent ourselves. And I was like, what? And then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child. And I was like, oh my God. Now, my friend tells me that I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that, but I bought the literature. I came home to New Haven, Connecticut, started going to an ACA meeting. A few weeks later, another women's meeting for ACA started. And then I joined a small group of other women doing to do the 12 steps together. while I'm still going to CODA, but I'm just going to a meeting, not doing anything else outside the meeting. And I'm starting to see and feel this massive like healing and recovery and understanding of what happened to me. I didn't know something, quote, happened to me. And about a year into that journey, I decided I was going to let go of CODA because it was maybe like a 75% fit for me, whereas ACA was 100%. And there was some stuff going on in the meeting and I was like, eh. And that turned out to be a higher powered moment for me because one of the women I was doing the 12 steps with had started going to Overeaters Anonymous and had been talking about her relationship with food, especially sugar, in a way that I really identified with. And so she invited me to go to a meeting with her. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a compulsive overeater, which I didn't even know was a thing. So I'm now down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I've been at my goal weight for over 7 years. And so I've done the 12 steps in both programs. And so for me, I think of, I mentioned all the tons of decades of work I did before. I think of that stuff as having like scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery melted the iceberg of my life. So for me, the 12 steps are where it's at, which is why I started my podcast, because I was like, there's all this wisdom in recovery that's just not making its way out into the world. I want to get it out there. And so I started that in the March of 2019. So it's been almost 6 years and I have over 300 episodes. And it was, what's funny is in the beginning, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough material. Here I am 300 and something episodes later. But I would say for me, like the real journey, even though I'd been on a journey of personal development for many years, the real journey began in 2015. And what I haven't mentioned, and I do want to make sure that I mention, I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s. I started smoking weed when I was 14 years old and smoked very heavily for many years. I did stop a little bit here and there, but it wasn't like a decision that I made, but it waxed and waned. I smoked cigarettes and then I quit, and I put that in air quotes because I literally quit for 6 months and then I snuck smoking and lied about it for 20 years, just like my mom did, unless I was out in the world drinking with friends who drank and smoked, and then I would smoke in front of them. But I would buy cigarettes. And even though I really was raised, like, do not ever litter, I would buy cigarettes. I'd be like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I would throw the pack out the window. That's like so against my values.
Yeah.
And I did that. And then I'd stop that around the time when I stopped the drinking. And I didn't quit drinking. I stopped. And I actually didn't stop entirely. I stopped entirely for a year. And then after that, I would have a drink here and there, but I didn't drink to get drunk, which is what I did for the previous however many years.
Yeah, I feel like people based off of your past, the way you explained, 'cause I'm glad you brought it up with the whole drinking and the cigarettes, because I wanted to see like how that affected you, because to someone who has a childhood like that, it could lead into things like substance abuse and
Right.
such. At least like for me, like in high school, I smoked weed, but I've never smoked cigarettes, as I mentioned before, but I did abuse alcohol in high school. And, at the time you think, oh, I'm just having fun.
Yeah.
Like, this is how high school's supposed to be. And then now me being 29, I like notice, I'm like, wow, which I already knew I was sad in high school, but like a lot of people were sad if you really think about it. But then I met people who actually didn't drink in high school. I'm like, wow, you must have a okay childhood, like, or whatever.
Yeah.
But also like the part when you were mentioning that you kept it the cigarette part that you kept it a secret for 20 years. Why did you keep it a secret? Did you feel like you were ashamed, or?
It's to this day, it baffles me, Justine. I
Mhm.
guess it was shame. I think it's just one of the many dysfunctional behaviors that I had, I think based on what you just said about like talking about my childhood, like when I smoked weed as a teenager, I thought I was cool. Now I'm like, I had trauma and I was trying to numb my nervous system is what was going
Right.
on. And that's one of the things that in the ACA program, it's a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and to use the 12 steps to recover. When I first got in, I'm like, trauma? Like, I don't know. Well, I finally came to understand that trauma can result from the absence of good things happening to you. And then I later heard it said trauma can result from unmet needs. So this is what is often called either little t trauma or relational trauma. when most people hear trauma, they think of like big T trauma or like a blunt trauma, like you were raped or you were in a war zone or you were in a hurricane or something like that. This kind of trauma that I have had, that I have, and that most people in AC have is sort of, I call it like the drip, drip, drip of emotional invalidation. So when you're not like, when people are not telling the truth and you're pretending stuff is not happening, and when your feelings are not acceptable and you're not able to express them fully and feel them, then it traumatizes you and causes you to have these disruptive patterns. The nervous system gets out of whack. We're in fight or flight mode most of the time. And so that explains like the drugs and the alcohol, because I was trying to self-medicate. And I think, I got diagnosed with episodic depression in 2006. I'd had a number
What
of
was it called?
episodic. So it's like episodes of depression
Okay, yeah.
as opposed to chronic. And
Yeah.
I had had a number of episodes of really bad depression, but I didn't understand that it was like diagnosable, medicatable depression. And then in 2006, I got diagnosed with that, and I went on medication. And I had a couple, like several different times. I'm on a mood stabilizer now, which I've been on for a number of years, but I haven't had any kind of episodes like I used to have in many, many years. And I think that a gigantic part of that has to do with the trauma recovery. And also the rest of the recovery is like really like healing myself and getting, and like for me, I think of my core wound as codependence. And so boundaries are essentially the antidote to codependence. So for me, building healthy boundaries was just profound in its impact on me. And so I'm really clear what's okay and what's not okay with me, what I like, what I want, what I need, what I prefer. I'm okay with telling people that. I can have a difficult conversation, whereas in the past, I would do anything to avoid that. I was a chameleon. I was a people pleaser. I went along with what other people said. At the same time, Justine, I always felt like a powerful woman of agency. I did not feel like people were walking all over me. But when I look back, I'm like, oh, I did actually feel like people were taking advantage of me. But people don't take advantage of you. You give people an advantage.
You give them the power, yeah.
Right, exactly. And so when I heard the term people pleaser, I was like, I don't think I ever heard that before recovery, which is kind of shocking. And I remember thinking, oh, that's my friend Joanne, not me. Oh my God, I have been such a people pleaser. I just didn't really see what was going on behind my behavior. I thought I was really helpful because I was nice. And now I'm like, oh, I was really helpful because I really wanted your approval. Whether it
Yeah.
was thinking that I'm nice or thinking that I'm helpful or thinking that, I'm reliable and dependable, was like, that was the kind of thing that I really wanted. But until I came to see that was going on, I just thought, I'm a nice person. That's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, and it takes a bit for someone to get to that. And the saddest thing that we have in society is that when people set boundaries, they look at them like, "Oh, she's such a bitch."
Yeah, I mean,
Like that's hard.
yeah, some people do. And those are people with poor boundaries who think that. And they're people. So what typically happens is if you've been like bending over backwards and accommodating and making other people's lives easier, and then you stop bending over backwards and stop accommodating and stop making their lives easier, it's annoying to them because
Yeah.
now their life is going to get harder. So those are the kinds of people that will say something like that. But people who have healthy boundaries are like, go you, nice boundary. And I think that what you just brought up is a big fear that people have is, I don't want to be seen as cold and bitchy. Well, you can be like very kind and have healthy boundaries. I think, Brene Brown talks about this. And, I think clear is kind. So I told you, like, I'm at my friend's house and we're doing this little mini retreat. And I don't remember what the thing was this morning that I said to somebody. And they said, I can always count on you to tell me where you stand. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it because I know where you stand. It's such a relief. I don't have to guess. These are people that I'm in recovery with. So we talk like this,
Yeah.
but I can't tell you how many people since I have healthy boundaries tell me, I really trust you, Barb. Because when you're willing to set a limit with someone or when you're willing to say no to them, they trust that when you say yes to them, that it's real, that you're not just saying it to please them. You're saying it because
Yes.
it's really the truth and they can count on you. And they also know, like one of my friends was also talking about how, you know, she's a very emotional person. And one of her fears is scaring people when she gets really, really upset.
Hmm.
And that when she has someone like me in her life, she knows that if it gets to be too much, I will take care of myself. And she doesn't need to take responsibility for taking care of me when she's really upset. So she can count on me because I'm a stable force. And that if something is throwing me off of my stableness, I'm going to deal with that. I'm
True.
going to take care of it. Like I would remove myself or something like that, or whatever I needed to do. She doesn't have to worry about taking care of me because I'm not looking to get something from other people in this sort of, I guess the word secretive, that's not the best word, but this like, when you're people pleasing, you're like, for me, what I'll just talk about me, I was looking for people's approval. I honestly didn't even really know I was doing it. So it's like, I'm on this secret mission to get your approval, but we're not going to talk about that. I deeply subconsciously know it. Consciously, I don't know it. You might know it. You might not know it. But after a while, you're going to be like, she does this to everybody. It's not really like she's helping me because she loves me. It's because they might think she's just a really helpful person. But some people are going to be like, I think she's doing it because she has some ulterior motive, which I did, but
Hmm.
I wasn't even aware of it.
Yeah. The subconscious mind's it's insane.
Yes, there's so much going on there.
I shouldn't say this, but like sometimes my subconscious, I'm like, oh, it kind of scares me a little bit, but I can't be scared of it. I also just read so much about what we're talking about right now. I read a lot about trauma because it's just one, I should obviously be educated, and two, it just really fascinates me. Right now, I'm currently reading the book, Why Am I Like This? And I'm sure we've all had this experience where you're like, why am I like this? And it just goes back and pretty much is what we're talking about right now.
Right,
It's like, why are
exactly.
we people pleasing? Why are we like being like codependent and such? Can you give me an example of a boundary that you set with somebody?
So this might not sound like much, but this was when I first like really understood this is me setting a boundary. So about a year before I started actively working the 12 steps in ACA, I had broken up with a guy.
Mhm.
And so we were no longer dating and he would send me emails from time to time. So I would be at work and I would go into my personal email for some like legitimate reason, and there would be an email from him, and I would feel compelled to open it. I would be
Mhm.
mad at him for interrupting my day, even though I'm the one that opened it. And then I would feel compelled to respond, and I would be all kinds of upset. So the person that I needed to set a boundary with wasn't someone else, it was me. Like it didn't even occur to me, Justine, that I could not open the email. Like I had to be told by the women in my step group, you don't actually have to open that. And then even if you do, you don't have to respond right away. But here's where I went in my mind. I was like, he's going to think I'm a bad person. And they're like, first of all, he's your ex-boyfriend. So what he thinks shouldn't really matter. Number two, he doesn't know when you open the email. Like, and Justine, I'm not dumb. Okay. But this is how deeply entrenched this behavior is. So that was the first boundary, a boundary that I set with another person, which was, I thought when I started setting boundaries that I could go to my brother and be like, I really don't want to talk politics. And then he'd be like, "Oh, okay. No, it doesn't work that way. That's like trying to control another person. So my boundaries are for me and they're about me. They're not for you or against you or anything like that." And so I would say to him, I really don't want to talk politics. He's kind of incapable of not talking politics. He like lives and breathes politics. And so I thought I could just keep reminding him. And then I finally realized, wait a minute, it's my boundary. I am the person who doesn't want to talk politics. He wants to. So I can't make him into a person that doesn't talk politics. So what am I going to do about it? So what I decided to do was to spend less time with my brother and less frequently. So
Mhm.
I chose not to say anything to him. That was my choice because of who he is. But I could have said, listen, if you don't stop talking politics all the time, I'm not going to come around very often, and I'm not going to stay for very long. But I chose not to do that. And it was such an enormous relief to be around him much less often and for such short periods of time that I didn't get like the guilt and the shame that a lot of people talk about when setting boundaries. I also didn't have a conversation with him. So that's like the part about boundaries that most people think about is the part where you're telling someone. Sometimes you don't even tell them, you just change your behavior. But when somebody asked me, they're like, why didn't you feel guilty? I said, I think the relief was so enormous of not having to take the onslaught of my brother's stuff that it kind of like, washed away any guilt or shame that I might have had, because I was like, this is such a relief. I didn't know my whole life. I don't have to take whatever comes from my brother.
Yeah.
I don't have to put up with it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I completely relate to you with the whole politics thing, especially in this world we're having right now. I currently have a problem where I really don't like talking about it. Not because I am thinking, oh, I'm not a bad person, because obviously things are very important. But I feel that people feel that I need to know every single thing of every problem that we're having in this country. And it's draining. It's absolutely draining. So a boundary I did actually when the week of the inauguration, of course, social media everybody was posting about it. Everybody was posting.
Well, not everybody, because I wasn't.
Well, I didn't know you then.
I bet you weren't either, right?
I don't think I was.
Right, yeah.
Like, I don't go like full out. I mean, there was one time I actually, not slip. I guess slip it was more just, I guess, I was triggered because when I found out that DACA, people are getting their health insurance taken away. I think it's because I need to have health insurance because of all my chronic issues. So I can't even imagine my health insurance being taken away. Mm-hmm. So that's why I kind of like, besides that little slip up that I had about like 2 weeks ago, I try my best to not just be constantly, because people who just share constantly, there's so much you can do with awareness. But so going back to what I was saying about boundary is that I had to start muting people. That's what I had to do. I had to start muting everybody, and I'm just like, I hate how I have to mute you, but it's like I can't. Like, if that's all you're sharing, it's like, one, obviously it makes you not want to be on social media. But since I do social media like full time and such, I kind of have to be on it in a way. So, another thing I had to do to help myself is watch a bunch of cat videos.
Good for you. Right. So you're basically getting rid of the things that drain you and doing things that energize you. That's
because I need to stay sane.
Right.
And
exactly.
Yeah. And some people do talk about that. I'm like, okay, I'm so glad someone understands it. Then I'm trying so hard. I'm getting better at it to not feel guilty of not being like everybody else that keeps posting about everything of so much anger. And like, my boyfriend used to be like that. He doesn't do that anymore ever since he started dating me, because I explained to him how constantly ranting on social media and just being angry, like, that's not productive. It's not doing anything. It's bad for your mental health. And then when you see someone being angry, then you want to be angry, and then they want to be angry, and then we're just like, everyone's angry.
Right. Yeah. I actually stopped listening to the news and paying attention to politics because of my homeless friend Dan, because when he was at my house, he wanted to listen to music, because the homeless person, he has no way to listen to music, and he loves music. And when I started listening to music more, because I used to listen to NPR all the time, and I miss the human interest stories, but I don't miss the news. And I was like, wow, this is way better for my mental health to listen to music. So I haven't paid attention to the news or politics for over 10 years. And, for the first 5 years, Justine, I would say I'm on a hiatus from the news. And after 5 years, I'm like, it's not a hiatus. I don't listen to the news and politics. And when I thought about like, why was I saying, oh, it's a hiatus? It was because I was worried that people would think that I was ignorant and uninformed. But here's the thing. I am ignorant and uninformed, and I am okay with it, because guess what? I have peace and serenity, and you don't. And I'd rather have peace and serenity and be ignorant than uninformed.
Yeah.
Be informed and educated and have my nervous system out of whack 24 hours a day, the way that it used to be. Like And I also believe that the world is better served when Barb has good mental health, because I'm a
Yes.
stable force wherever I go, because I'm not I'm not living in chaos. I'm not creating chaos and drama everywhere I go, because my nervous system is regulated, because I take care of myself.
Yes, absolutely. Preaches to the choir.
Yeah.
I completely like relate to you. And I think that all in my head, I've just never actually said it out loud because I think there's a part of me where I guess it comes from the not wanting to be people thinking that I'm a horrible person, which I know myself that I'm not a horrible
Right.
person.
Yeah.
But like sometimes the voices that's outside externally, but people always saying like, if you're not posting, if you're not informed, you're, because the word ignorant, I see it as like it's negative and such. Like you're
Right.
ignorant, uninformed, you're so privileged. You
Yeah.
get that a lot too. And it's like the boundary I need to, of course, set for myself, I need to currently work on is I will listen when it comes to voting. Like when it comes to that part where, okay, it's time for me to have my voice heard and to vote, then that's when I'll start like doing my research and being informed. And I really, really wish that that's how it could be.
Yeah.
Instead of everyone just like flipping out, like I get it, like what's going on, it's crazy. But also there's news sources out there that make it look even 10 times worse, but the way
Right.
they do their wording, because people need to know that the agenda for news sources is to piss you off.
Right. So get you coming back. And yeah, right.
Yeah, and it just puts us all against each other, and it makes me like scared to leave the house. Like, who's gonna attack me? People are out here. Yesterday, I did some food delivery. People are out here beeping at me. Like, even if I literally like took 2 seconds to take my foot off the brake to get to the
Yeah.
and it was just everyone's just so angry, and it makes me so sad. And I try to stay away from that.
I think people, if they know anything about boundaries, they're pretty clear that when we have healthy boundaries, we're keeping, quote, bad things out. But people with healthy boundaries also let good things in.
Mm-hmm.
They let things in that promote their mental health, things that relax them, things that energize them, things that regenerate and refuel them. And when you're constantly taking in chaotic information and being in chaotic environments, that's not peaceful. That's
Mm-hmm.
not rejuvenating. That is not regenerating. That is not soothing and calming. And so when you have healthy boundaries, you start to make conscious choices. Like I kind of didn't know that I wasn't making choices, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I feel like one of the biggest people that talks about boundary setting and probably where I started getting more serious is actually Kourtney Kardashian.
I'm not, I know who she, like, I don't think I would recognize a picture, but I know the names of the
Yeah,
Kardashians.
I mean, I feel like everybody knows who the Kardashians are. Some people think of the Kardashians depending on how much they like watch their show or listen. Like there's, obviously in the early 2000s, they were looked at like these party girls and such, but they're not like that anymore if people were to like watch the show. But 'cause at first it was like my guilty pleasure, but their show is actually not even like that at all. So Courtney talked a lot about boundaries, and
Oh,
she was
good.
like the first person in her family that were very serious about it.
Mhm.
And then that actually like did cause a lot of like friction in the family and fights. So, but she kept to it, and she's like happier than ever. Good for her, right? So I feel like she's a great influence when it comes to that. And then Chloe's getting better at that. And so I see all this good stuff. I like to look at the good of everybody. I don't like to, because, people are gonna, like, if I see something on like on Facebook of some article about the Kardashians, like people would just, before even reading the article, they would just start being like, oh, I hate the Kardashians. Oh, they're so this, I'm just like, and they just hate them just to hate them. There's
Right.
people
Yeah.
out
Like,
there who
why do
just
you
hate just to
care?
hate.
Yeah. Like, go live your life rather than being on social media commenting about people that you don't like.
Right? I
Yeah.
can never understand how people can
Yeah.
hate somebody that they don't know. I never understood that. So yeah, I can go on a rant on that, and we don't want that kind of. I gotta like keep myself accountable for that because I can go on rants, and that's not what we're trying to do today. But you were talking about the 12-step recovery. Can you talk more about that? Because I'm very curious.
Yeah, sure. So most people, if they've ever heard of 12-step recovery at all, they know about Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous was the first 12-step recovery program ever. It was created in the 1930s in the United States by co-founders Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. And it's based on, there was some, it's called the Oxford movement, and they had like 6 steps. It was a Christian movement, but it was the first time in the history of humans that droves and droves and droves of alcoholics stopped drinking and stayed sober for any length of time. And there are now some 200 and something 12-step recovery programs. So they are spiritual programs, not religious. So even though the initial roots were in Christianity, it's not really based on Christianity. And so I think, it seems to me, my personal experience is one of the reasons why 12-step recovery works so well is, number one, it's a stepwise program. There are 12 steps and you go through them in this order. Number two, you do it in a group setting with other people that are going through the same thing as you. So when you go to a 12-step meeting, there are going to be people in there who've been there for a very long time. There are going to be people who just started, and there are going to be people just like you that just walked in the door. So you're going to have this wide variety of people from all walks of life to learn from. Number three, it's a spiritual program. So it's grounded in the idea that I am part of something greater than myself. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in deity. But you do have to believe that out there somewhere, there's some kind of power greater than you. So for some people, the power greater than themselves might be the power of the group. It might be something like nature or gravity or, something like that. But I think that has a lot to do with why, it works so well. And so the first 12-step program, as I mentioned, was Alcoholics Anonymous. The second one was called Al-Anon. And if you're not familiar, Al-Anon is a program for the loved ones of alcoholics. And you may be wondering, why do the loved ones of alcoholics need a program? And that is because the things we do sort of naturally to get our alcoholic loved ones to stop drinking, to get into rehab, to go to detox, to get into recovery, actually backfire. So what we end up doing is focusing entirely on them, trying to control their behavior and neglecting ourselves. And then we get resentful of them, and then they get resentful of us because they feel controlled. And then they tend to use your controlling behavior as a reason to say, this is why I drank. And it's just this big mess. So what we realize is that when we have a loved one who is an alcoholic or an addict, we have to focus on ourselves. And so a lot of the clients that I have as boundaries clients have loved ones that are alcoholics and addicts. Some of my clients are also alcoholics and addicts, though not all of them, and not all of them are in recovery. But basically focusing on yourself and your life, and also stopping doing things that enable your alcoholic or drug addicted loved one. And so what that means is things like, let's say that you're the parent of an adult child who's an alcoholic. Well, if you let them live at your home rent free and they can use all of their money for alcohol, then you stop letting them live at your house rent free. So either you get them out of the house, or you charge them rent, or you have them leave. But there are people who are so enmeshed that they feel like they're hurting them by not letting them live there. And they don't understand you're actually hurting them by making it easier for them to continue to use. And it is true that let's say you do kick your adult child out, maybe they might end up living in the streets. It's possible that they might. But if you are living your life and you continue to have the joy and the hobbies and the restful nights at sleep, at least somebody in your family is having a high quality life, and that's you. Whereas when they're staying at your home and they're using and you're enabling, neither one of you is having a high quality life. So it is a really hard line when it gets to be at that point. But I'm giving a dramatic illustration to kind of get the point across. But now apparently there's some 200 12-step recovery programs. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the part where the whole enabling thing, which I completely agree with you on that. So what would you say to people who may call, let's say, the mother selfish or a bad mother? What would you say to those people? Because there will be people like that.
If I was a mother and I stopped enabling and someone said I was a bad mother, I would say, that
basically, so not the word enabling. So they may not see it like that. Just all they see is I threw my son out on the street.
Right. So someone might say you're a bad mother because you threw your son out on the street. So first of all, I didn't throw my son out on the street. I asked him to leave my home. So if he wants to go live somewhere else, then he can go
Mm-hmm.
ahead and do that. And secondly, you know, that may be so, maybe you think I am a bad mother. I personally think I'm being a good mother.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're hitting on right here, Justine, this is it right here. The core is the thing that causes us to not set boundaries is we care so much what other people think. So for
Exactly.
me personally, the core element of me going from no boundaries for 50 something years to having such healthy boundaries that I'm now a boundaries coach is that I
Mm-hmm.
came to care more what I think of me than what other people
Yes.
do. Now, this doesn't mean I don't care at all what people think of me. Of course I do. What it means is I used to be willing to throw my integrity out the window and lie and manipulate through my people-pleasing ways so that people would approve of me. And I'm no longer willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if I need to like manage my image to get you to like me and feel like crap about it, I'm not doing it. And so I actually have my own approval now, right? So when I say we come to care more what we think about ourselves than what other people think about us, it doesn't mean we don't care at all what they think.
Mm-hmm.
It means I place my opinion of me higher than your opinion of me. And that's the work that I do with my clients is I take them through this process week by week over a 12 module, 12-week program where they start actually putting the focus internally on themselves, focusing on their values, what matters to them most, and
Mm-hmm.
then setting boundaries in such a way that it supports, promotes, and upholds those values. And that's actually the key to getting rid of that guilt and shame, is getting back into integrity with yourself and really treating yourself lovingly.
So I like what you like hit on that, like caring more about what you think of yourself versus like what you think of other people.
Or what
With
other
my
people think of you.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. Did I say that wrong? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. That's totally what I meant. Not like not caring about the people, not caring about what other people think of you.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. That's what I meant. Thank you for correcting me on that. I didn't even realize I didn't realize I said it incorrectly. I would have went back at the editing and be like, really, Justine? Yeah. So I appreciate you as a guest getting. Oh yeah, perfect. I have two parents, and I feel like you and my mother get along so well
Oh, good.
because when you were explaining that to me, my mom said it just like that too to me. Yeah, yeah, and I feel like as a child, I didn't really understand because my dad is like the opposite of that. He cares so much about what other people think of him, which is of course a trauma response, but he doesn't know that. He's like the biggest people pleaser you will ever meet in your life. And so thinking about how like my mom and him, like she doesn't care what other people think about her, and he cares so much is like, and I'm like, it's a lot of fighting. It's a lot of fighting. It's not fun, but yeah, no, I grew up with like two of those voices in my head. So I'm trying, of course, going more towards on my mom because when I was young, my mom was acting like that. People were kept putting things in my mind that, oh, my mom's so selfish. Also, I actually talked to my mom recently. So basically, my mom is upset that my dad took her from moving to New Jersey to Florida. And even though it's been like 2 years, sometimes she'll still go to like the friends and complain about it. But after a while, the friends don't want to keep hearing the complaining. So my mom didn't realize what her actions were doing to other people. And when I talked to her a couple of nights ago, she was like, Justine, I'm actually realizing what I did affecting people. It's like, could I always think about myself to protect myself? But I never thought of me doing what I was doing is actually upsetting other people. So she recognized that.
Right. Yeah. So there's a couple of things in there. I would say that what you're talking about, that your mom learned that she needed what I would call a boundary of self-containment, which is to stop complaining about something because the thing happened one time.
Yeah.
And also, your mother's an adult. Your dad didn't make her go to Florida. She went with him. And that was a choice that she made. It may not have felt like a choice because she could have stayed.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe didn't feel like a choice, but it was because she's an adult and she got to make that choice. But the other thing I want to address is this word selfish that you said sometimes people think your mom is selfish. I have a huge problem with that word selfish because you don't hear men being called selfish and you don't hear men having a problem with it, but it's one of the worst things you can call a woman. It's almost like you put a woman in her place by calling her selfish. And taking care of yourself and living your life on purpose is not selfish. So if you think about when you ride in an airplane, they did that whole speech at the beginning. If the oxygen mask falls down and you're caring for someone next to you, put the mask on yourself first before you do it on the other person. What they don't say is because if you're passed out, you can't help them, right? So when you
Yeah.
take care of yourself first, you get to pour from the overflow rather than from an empty cup. And
Mhm.
so many women are so afraid of being considered selfish that they
Mhm.
will bleed themselves dry and try to pour from an empty cup. Whereas if you fill your cup so that it's overflowing and you only pour from the overflow, you always have a full cup and you have more to give. And who would you rather receive from, Justine? Would you rather receive from someone who's trying to squeeze out something from the bottom of an empty cup or someone who is pouring from the overflow? Of
Exactly.
course, you would rather the overflow. So this idea of selfishness really bothers me a lot
Mhm.
because so many women, like I had a client actually said to me, I would rather be called a whore than selfish. Like, what is going on in this world that a
Yeah,
woman would
right?
rather be called a whore than selfish?
No, that's actually like really true. I feel like selfish is like a universal word where people just throw that out when they don't get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think that's
you
like a lot.
selfish. And it's like, and also, like, what does selfishness mean? It doesn't mean
Mhm.
you're a murderer, right? It might mean you put yourself first. Well, men are doing that all the time, you know,
True.
right? So, anyway,
No, that totally makes sense. So before we have such an amazing conversation, before we do end, I want you to talk about your podcast. I know you brought up a little bit, but I want to like learn more about it.
yeah, sure. So, it's called Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. You can find it on any podcast outlet or go to fragmentedtowhole.com. I have over 300 episodes, 40 something of which are about boundaries. Speaking of boundaries, I offer a free boundary building starter kit. It's at boundariesstarterkit.com. And it's got a ton of great stuff in it, including a playlist of just the 40 something episodes about boundaries. And anytime I add a new episode about boundaries, it will show up in that playlist.
Mhm.
So, on that boundary building starter kit, it's for people who say yes when they really want to say no, for people who don't have the words to say. There's some mindset stuff in there. I've got a couple of worksheets in there. Like I mentioned about like getting clear on what your values are. So the very first exercise I have all clients do is come up with their top 5 values. That exercise is in that boundary building starter kit. So the episodes are usually 10 to 20 minutes, solo episodes of me. At episode 100, I started having guests every 10th episode, and it's typically them sharing what they learned from recovery. My 299th and my 300th episodes are actually solo episodes by me, but they're quite a bit longer than normal because it was like a big milestone and I wanted to share a bunch of stuff. But it's a passion for me. As I mentioned, I really want all this wisdom that I learned in recovery to get out into the world.
Thank you so much for having the podcast to provide all of that wisdom and such and all the free starter kit. But also, thank you for coming on here. I've
Oh,
learned so
thank you
much
for
from you.
inviting me.
It was also therapeutic as well.
Good.
I've
Oh,
learned a lot from you,
oh,
and
goody.
yeah, I've come to have. I love having these good conversations because it sets the mood for the rest of the day.
Yes, yes.
Yes. I'm gonna put all your information in the podcast episode description so people can check it out.
Okay,
But yeah,
great.
thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Justine. Take care now.